Love, that mysterious impulse that moves and transforms us, so often seems to be challenged by the invisible forces of the universe. Why is it that precisely when we think we've found stability, trials, doubts, and conflicts appear to put us to the test? It isn't a coincidence. When the universe tests our capacity to love, it is revealing something deeper than it seems. A summons to consciousness, to growth, to the unveiling of our oldest wounds. From the perspective of Carl Jung's psychology, these tests are not traps but portals to individuation, the process that leads us toward wholeness. Every challenge in love carries within it the opportunity to see beyond the surface, to integrate shadows, to project less, and to love more authentically. If you believe that nothing happens by accident and that love can be a journey of self-knowledge, comment below. I choose to grow with love. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, love is not merely a romantic feeling, but a symbolic field where the deepest dynamics of the psyche manifest. When the universe seems to test our capacity to love, Jung would suggest we are actually being confronted with unconscious aspects of ourselves, what we project onto the other, what we deny in ourselves, and what still needs integration for love to become truly whole. Projection is a central concept. When falling in love, a person tends to project onto the partner idealized images, archetypes of the animus or anima, the inner masculine and feminine figures. However, as the relationship progresses, these projections dissolve, revealing the other's reality and forcing us to confront what lies within us. That moment of crisis is not an ending, but the true beginning of the possibility of loving consciously. The universe's tests are also the tests of the shadow, that part of us we deny and hide. Love is the ideal stage for the shadow to manifest precisely because it places us in intimacy and vulnerability. When something goes wrong, there is always something to be discovered within ourselves. The process of individuation, which Jung describes as the journey toward the totality of the self, inevitably passes through love. Not an idealized romantic love, but a love capable of containing conflict, sustaining difference, and growing alongside pain. True love is a path of integration, of masculine and feminine, of conscious and unconscious, of self and other. At the beginning of a romantic relationship, it is common to see the other not as they really are, but as we wish them to be. That initial enchantment, which feels magical and overwhelming, is often fueled by the unconscious projections we cast onto the beloved. For Carl Jung, this phenomenon is inevitable and even necessary at a certain stage of psychic development because it helps cement bonds and give shape to an ideal we are unconsciously seeking to complete within ourselves. The problem begins when we believe that this projected image is the permanent reality of the relationship. Romantic projections involve archetypal elements deeply rooted in the psyche, the animus and the anima. The animus represents the masculine principle within the woman, while the anima is the feminine principle within the man. When we fall in love, we are often not recognizing the other as they are, but activating these inner archetypes and projecting them onto the person. Thus we see in the partner the figure of the savior, the soulmate, the healer, when in truth we are before a complex human being with their own light and shadow. This idealization creates an illusion of completeness that is highly seductive, yet like every projection, it is destined to crumble over time. When the other's actions no longer match the image we created, we feel frustration, anger, or disappointment. In that moment, many believe that love is over, when in fact what is collapsing is merely the fantasy built around the other. The ensuing crisis is not the end of love, but the beginning of the possibility of loving consciously. It is at this point that the universe seems to test the relationship. Differences begin to show more intensely, conflicts surface, and insecurities emerge. What once seemed perfect now reveals flaws, limits, and contradictions. This confrontation, painful as it may be, is a valuable chance for psychological growth. It forces us to see the other as they truly are and to see ourselves with greater clarity. Jung did not see this as negative, but as an essential step toward emotional and spiritual maturation. To love without projections is to love without illusions. It is to accept the other in their wholeness, with their defects, wounds, and contradictions. This kind of love does not depend on fantasy, but on shared reality. In this rawer, truer landscape, a more solid and authentic bond can arise. When we are able to withdraw our projections, we face a mirror. We realize that what we so admired or condemned in the other was, in fact, a symbolic expression of inner contents. The process of withdrawing these images confronts us with the responsibility to look within and integrate the aspects we previously sought outside. If earlier we placed on the other the task of saving us, we now perceive that this task belongs to us. This shift in perspective can be painful, but it is also liberating. It transforms the relationship from one of unconscious dependency into one of conscious exchange. Love ceases to be a shelter for our deficiencies and becomes a space of encounter between two whole individuals, not perfect, but committed to truth. Thus, when the universe seems to challenge love, it is merely pushing the soul toward this threshold of consciousness. It dismantles the castles built in imagination so that we can build, brick by brick, something more real. This kind of love is calmer, deeper, and less susceptible to the winds of idealization. It is a love that survives projections and therefore becomes stronger. In romantic relationships, especially those that deepen over time, the conflicts that arise are often seen as external problems caused by the other's behavior. However, from the lens of Carl Jung's analytical psychology, much of these conflicts originate within ourselves. The shadow, a core concept in Jung's work, represents all the aspects of the psyche we deny, repress, or do not consciously recognize. When we do not deal with these internal contents, they inevitably project onto the partner, turning the relationship into a painful mirror of the unresolved parts of our being. The shadow is not composed only of traits considered negative, such as anger, envy, selfishness, or control. It can also contain repressed potentials, creative forces, and talents blocked during development by fear or social demands. In a romantic relationship, these hidden parts may surface explosively or subtly, creating estrangement and rupture. Often we do not understand why certain behaviors in the other irritate us so much, or why we repeat certain patterns even when we want to change. The answer, according to Jung, lies in the unintegrated shadow. When the universe seems to test love through crises and misunderstandings, it is, in fact, offering the opportunity to see the shadow in action. Emotional triggers that appear in arguments, recurring hurts, and even irrational jealousy are symbolic manifestations of that unconscious part crying out for recognition. The relationship becomes fertile ground for this confrontation because it is where we feel most vulnerable, most intimate, and most exposed. To love is also to open ourselves to the risk of seeing what we would rather not see in ourselves. For this reason, we often unconsciously choose partners who activate precisely our shadows. They represent the opposite of what we cultivate in the persona, the social mask we wear daily, and therefore they disturb us deeply. The romantic relationship in this sense is not just an emotional connection, but an invitation to deeper self-knowledge. What we most condemn or try to change in the other is usually linked to something we need to work on within. Recognizing the shadow does not mean passively accepting it or justifying destructive behaviors, but making it conscious. This act of awareness is the first step toward real transformation. When we identify that the anger we feel at a criticism is actually a reflection of our wounded pride, or that the need to control the partner hides a deep fear of abandonment, we cease to react automatically. We begin to respond with greater maturity, expanding the inner space between stimulus and reaction. Conscious love includes the willingness to welcome the shadow, both our own and the others. This does not mean accepting abuse or violence, but understanding that we are all in a process of integration and that the other is also dealing with their own abysses. Instead of using the relationship to project blame, frustrations, and demands, we can use it as a mutual opportunity for psychological and spiritual growth. This change in perspective is liberating. It removes us from the position of victim of circumstances and places us as active participants in our own healing process. When we view romantic conflicts as symbolic manifestations of the shadow, we can extract valuable lessons from them. We discover that behind the pain, there is always a truth that needs to be faced. The universe, therefore, does not test love out of cruelty, but so that we may mature and cease loving through our wounds, beginning instead to love with consciousness. Each crisis is an invitation to integrate the shadow, and the more whole we become, the freer we are to love without fear, without projections, and without defenses. Within Carl Jung's symbolic and archetypal approach, every human being carries both feminine and masculine aspects. These elements do not refer to biological sex, but to psychic qualities that manifest in different forms in inner life and in relationships. The feminine is associated with receptivity, intuition, sensitivity, care, and connection with the unconscious. The masculine, in turn, relates to action, reason, direction, structure, and consciousness. When these aspects are balanced and integrated, emotional bonds become healthier, more mature, and more complete. But when there are wounds in these poles, the wounded feminine and the disconnected masculine, relationships become fields of imbalance, pain, and unconscious repetition. The wounded feminine manifests in various ways: fear of surrender, emotional dependency, hypersensitivity, emotional manipulation, difficulty setting boundaries, and often a tendency to self-erase for the other's sake. It arises when, through experiences of abandonment, betrayal, rejection, or repression, the person begins to fear their own vulnerability and to see love as a threat. In this state, affection becomes a field of constant fear, fear of loss, of not being enough, of being left. The loving impulse, which should be fluid and spontaneous, becomes charged with tension and expectation. Instead of loving freely, one seeks to control, to please, or to hide. The disconnected masculine appears as emotional coldness, rigidity, avoidance of commitments, excessive rationalization of feelings, and difficulty dealing with the inner world. It establishes itself when, due to trauma, dysfunctional family models, or cultural repression, the individual distances from their own sensitivity and begins to live through a purely rational, outward logic. In the emotional field, this creates superficial bonds, evasion in the face of intimacy, and resistance to deep emotional involvement. The fear of emotional loss of control is so great that loving becomes a threat to identity. These two aspects, when wounded or distorted, tend to attract each other unconsciously in relationships. The wounded feminine seeks comfort and stability in the other, while the disconnected masculine fears exactly that emotional plunge. Thus, a cycle of frustration sets in. One gives too much, hoping to be recognized. The other withdraws, fearing being engulfed. The relationship becomes a field of expectation and escape, where each tries to heal their own pain through the other's behavior, without realizing that this healing can only begin from the inside out. Jung teaches that integrating these inner poles is an essential part of individuation. This means looking at one's inner feminine with compassion, allowing it to express itself authentically without guilt or dependency. It also means reconciling with the inner masculine, learning to set healthy boundaries, act with firmness, and direct energy consciously. When this integration begins to happen, the emotional field transforms. Love ceases to be a place of deficiency and becomes an expression of the wholeness of being. When the universe tests love, it is often provoking precisely this recognition. Where is our feminine wounded? Where is our masculine disconnected? Crises arise not as punishment, but as living mirrors of these internal disharmonies. If we feel constantly rejected, we may be denying our own self-worth. If we flee commitment, perhaps we fear facing our emotional depth. These tests are symbolic invitations to reconnect with these inner archetypes. The true loving encounter can only take place between two individuals who, even if in process, are integrating these poles within. When the inner feminine and masculine harmonize, there is space for a love that welcomes without self-erasing, that surrenders without losing itself, that guides without dominating. This is the love that does not fear life's tests, because it is no longer sustained by lack, but by wholeness. In Carl Jung's deeper vision, every human being is engaged, consciously or unconsciously, in an inner journey called individuation. This process does not seek perfection, but totality, the integration of all parts of the self, light and shadow, conscious and unconscious, anima and animus, masculine and feminine. Romantic relationships, because of their emotional intensity and symbolic power, play a central role in this journey. Far from being mere sources of pleasure or stability, they function as living mirrors of the psyche, revealing what is still fragmented, what needs transformation, and what must be integrated. When we connect deeply with someone, we open not only the heart but also the unconscious. This openness activates complexes, revives old memories, reactivates forgotten traumas, and at the same time reveals potentials not yet lived. In this sense, love is not neutral. It is an archetypal force acting like an alchemical agent, initiating inner processes of dissolution and reintegration. Each meaningful emotional encounter mobilizes symbols, pains, desires, and patterns that were dormant, the partner becomes a portal to our own unconscious. Jung describes individuation as the pathway by which the ego, the conscious part of personality, comes into contact with the self, the regulating center of the psyche, which is larger, wiser, and deeper than ordinary consciousness. The romantic relationship offers a symbolic avenue for that approach. Crises, friction, impasses, and cycles of closeness and distance reveal internal dynamics that need work. To love, in this context, becomes a psycho-spiritual practice. Every conflict is a coded message from the unconscious, a call to transformation. At first, we commonly seek in the other what we feel is missing in ourselves: security, affection, direction, acceptance. This movement, though natural, is incomplete. As the relationship matures, we are challenged to reclaim within what we had projected outward. If we once hoped to be saved by the partner, we now realize we must assume responsibility for our own healing. The relationship shifts from a field of compensation to a field of mirroring and development. We start to perceive that the difficulties in the bond are not obstacles to love, but the very material that nourishes and deepens it. At that stage, the universe may seem relentless. Pattern repetitions, recurring pains, unexpected separations, intense connections that defy logic. All of these emerge as symbolic elements, pulling us out of our comfort zone and forcing growth. When love is tested, the soul is being invited to evolve. Relationships cease to be places of emotional safety and become alchemical laboratories where the ego is melted and reconfigured, where we learn to love with consciousness, presence, and humility. The relationship that serves the individuation process is not necessarily the calmest or most stable, but the one that provokes us to go beyond the surface, that pushes us to question our masks, that helps us perceive what is still unconscious. It does not seek only external harmony, but internal congruence. It demands courage to look inward, to listen to pain, to own our mistakes, and to recognize the projections that distort our sight of the other. When two people embark, even unconsciously, on this process, the relationship becomes a spiritual journey. Each is teacher and mirror to the other. Love transforms into an initiatory path, where intimacy reveals not just the other, but the self in its complexity. It is not about achieving a perfect state of connection, but about walking together toward a deeper level of consciousness. Therefore, if the universe keeps testing your love, perhaps it is actually testing your commitment to your own soul. The challenge is not merely to maintain the relationship, but to allow it to transform you, reveal you, elevate you. To love at this level is an act of courage and surrender to the greater process of becoming who you are. To love is not a refuge from pain, but a courageous plunge into one's own soul. When the universe seems to test love, it is not punishing, it is awakening. Every challenge, every rupture, every discomfort is a symbolic opportunity to look beyond the other and see ourselves. Carl Jung showed us that the deepest relationships are also the most revealing. They are portals that connect us to the shadow, to projections, to the inner feminine and masculine, and to the sacred process of individuation. If we seek to love in truth, we must accept that love will not spare us from self-knowledge. On the contrary, it will drag us into the depths, confront illusions, and demand growth. But it is precisely in this movement that love transforms from lack into strength, from idealization into reality, from attachment into freedom. Now that you have come this far, know that this content was created for those ready to transform love into a journey of consciousness. Subscribe to the channel and watch the video appearing here on the screen. It will take you even deeper along this path of inner transformation. Remember, love is the greatest teacher the universe has ever created.